now we are leading up to a separate live stream that Braxton did on his channel, where they were specifically talking about a clip that I did here on Paulogia Live. Now, that Paulogia Live clip was me addressing Jimmy Wallace, who is J. Warner Wallace's son, talking about hell. And in that clip, I was talking about my own personal reflections on why those arguments didn't work for me, personally, me, Paulogia. I wasn't in that video. You can go back and look. I wasn't in that video making a broad case for why Christianity isn't true. I was just giving my own personal reflections. So imagine my surprise when Braxton did an entire live stream about my personal reactions to hell and why my personal reactions to hell are not my own personal reactions. That Braxton and his crew know me better than I know myself.
The challenge here is, just in case anyone misunderstood, Paulogia is saying, well, here's the thing. Would I worship God? The problem is, if I came to believe that annihilation or universal reconciliation is true, then I wouldn't worship God because I really don't have anything to lose. Maybe I lose eternity in heaven, but I don't really want to live forever. What do you have to say about that?
What my answer to this boils down to is, I don't think Paul's really being honest with himself. You see, when we are in comfort, when we are not in any danger, when things are going really well, it's really easy to pretend as though I could take eternal life or leave it. Right? If I don't really mind the prospect of being annihilated, but everybody, whenever their life is in danger, knows that that pretense flies out the window as soon as one's life is in danger.
Okay. Oh, this is a lot. So the guest here at the bottom, his name is Chris Date, is my understanding. And Chris Date at one point wrote a book that I have not read regarding annihilation view of Christianity. So he's done more research on some of this stuff than normal. But Chris's answer to my claim that I'm fine being annihilated is that I'm lying to myself. And his claim seems to be that my life is so good and so great, and that I have not properly evaluated and given serious enough weight and consideration to my life, that I must be wrong, and that if I'm thinking this way, it is only because I have not looked into it or thought deeply about this. We will use that in a moment. What I wanted to point out here is this blog. This blog is called Chromosome 2, though you can currently reach it at paulogia.com. The date on this particular entry is May 28th, 2016. The blog entry is called 2 Weeks of 4 Weeks to Live. Now, May 28th is long before I started my channel. I started my channel in December of 2016. I never knew that any of this was ever going to happen. And this particular blog entry, I speak about April 25th. You can't see my highlighting. April 25th of that same year, where I was given 4 weeks to live. And for 2 weeks, I was under the impression that I might have only 4 weeks to live. And this whole blog post talks about my experiences those 2 weeks, long before I ever had a channel. So this is something you guys can go check out for yourself. And you can read it and decide whether or not me, during that time, spent any level of introspection on whether or not I would like to be annihilated. Those were very, very hard times, and I don't like to think about them a lot, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But if you go read that blog entry, Chris, you will find that I stared my own mortality in the face. I was told to get my affairs in order. So for you to come in here on your live stream and say that Paul has never thought about his own mortality, and that's why he can be okay with annihilation, is sheer ridiculousness. I've thought about my own mortality in ways I never expected to. And I find your take on my take to be frankly offensive and ridiculous. And I think this is entirely, obviously, preaching to your choir, to who's going to nod. Who you feel threatened that my personal opinion about annihilation is that I'm fine with it? To be so problematic for your Christian worldview that you need to go on an hour-long live stream and talk about how I never have thought about death, and that's why I'm okay with it? What damage am I doing to your kingdom, man? How weak is your God? That's something you need to do, is to shore up your base. For those who don't know, I had cancer. I had a very strong, deadly version of a cancer that, through a lot of fighting and through early detection, I lived through. But yeah, at one point I was told to get my affairs in order. So don't tell me that I haven't thought about death.
And human history is replete with proof that people very much fear the termination of their very conscious existence in death. And that very fear, that very existential dread, there is a term.
Okay. So yes, in general, people fear. So he phrased it differently. They fear, the determination of their life or whatever. People fear death. And I actually fear the physical end of my life. So I am terrified based on I spent years in the hospital, and I saw different people live through cancer, and certain people lose their battles with cancer. I was able to witness it all around me, and everyone handled their own mortality differently. Some people at the end of their fight were willing, they were accepting of their fate, and they didn't seem terrified, but the physical discomfort of the ending of the life was unpleasant. Some people, well, I don't need to go into how it's unpleasant, but the physical end of your life can be miserable, and I fear it greatly. I fear being kept alive against my will, frankly. There's a reason why assisted suicide is a thing, a right that people fight for. It's not because universally we don't want to die. The fear of death is a healthy bit of evolution. I think that if we didn't fear death to some extent and try and avoid death, that our species wouldn't do that well. No species would do well that is trying to off ourselves on a regular basis, or at least before we reproduce. He's going to talk about the literature here. Let him finish that sentence.
For this, in the existential dread means something. It means exactly the kind of dread that we humans almost universally experience when we face or think about the prospect of our existence coming to an end in death.
No, that's not correct. So let me go back to these tabs. So he's trying to talk about, in psychiatry, how there is a term, existential dread. On this particular website, existential dread is a profound, deep-seated psychic or spiritual condition of insecurity and despair in relation to the human condition and the meaning of life. So, a profound, deep-seated condition. As I'm going to go through some of these, when existential dread is talked about in the literature, they're not talking about the general fear of death. They are talking about it as an actual condition. So this particular, for example, Psych Central, what's an existential crisis and how can I overcome it? Let me put this on this screen so I'm looking more accurately. Existential crisis, which is another word per this article, existential dread. Is existential dread linked to mental health conditions? So they're not saying that their version of existential dread is the normal case that everyone has. It's actually an exception. And it is on some of the conditions that are evolved around it are obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression, anxiety. This is not the type of normal, everyday fear of death that you're talking about. Not everyone has what what the psychologists would call existential dread or existential crisis. That's a more severe term. A couple more defensive strategies to diminish existential dread. Again, if the way psychologists talk about existential dread was as a normal everyday operating thing, we wouldn't be looking for strategies to diminish it. And actually, here was a terror management theory, was talking about, again, some of the literature in this area. Existential dread in the literature is not what you're talking about. And I don't want to. So he seems to be conflating two things here. He seems to be conflating fear of the dying, the actual fear of the end, versus, which I would agree, generally that's a healthy thing to fear death. But that's not the same as saying, I want to live forever. Death is often painful. Death means an end to certain things, but that does not go hand in hand with, I want to live forever. There's actually a reason why movies like Highlander and any movie or literature or book where you've got immortal characters, often those characters simply want to die. They simply want their life to come to an end. That resonates, again, if we want to go back to what's intuition, but it resonates with us that those don't go hand in hand. Fear of death and wanting to live forever are not one and the same thing.
Like you said, it's easy to say when you're living life and somebody asks you a question, but your life is of relative comfort, especially here in the West in comparison to other places in the world. But when you're living a life of comfort, you're not thinking about it too deeply. Yeah, it may seem something that this is not something I'm gonna have to deal with in the immediate.
So again, they're talking about me specifically, accusing me of not having thought about death deeply. And there's no reason for them to know that I once faced a death diagnosis. There's no reason that they could possibly know that. So I don't blame them for that. But what kind of psychoanalysis is this? Just to assume that this dude on a live stream who says that he's fine with being annihilated hasn't thought about death deeply? Not a good look.
And you can get to the point where you do see that, yeah, this is bogus when people say that they're not afraid of it. Because if you think about it long enough, it becomes terrifying, because I think people are underselling how afraid of death they really are.
Again, fear of death and a desire and a willingness to be annihilated are nothing at all the same. First of all, I'm talking about annihilation so that I don't have to keep living after I die. That doesn't mean I'm not afraid. The death part has already happened when we're talking about this hell versus no hell. So death is a prerequisite here. So this whole fear of death thing, that's actually a bit of a non sequitur. I've used that word a lot. The fact that, so I'm already dead, and then I'm staring there on Judgment Day, and God says, well, you know what? You didn't believe in me, so here are your choices. You can go be eternally consciously tormented, or I can just poof you out of existence. Which would you prefer? Already dead, either case, right? Of course, I would rather be annihilated. I don't need to hang around forever. Now, the video I was talking about, I was actually talking about the choice between heaven and annihilation. And there's nothing that I'm aware of right now where heaven, the idea of living forever in God's presence, actually seems like a thing that I would want. So again, this is subjective choice. I was merely talking about a subjective choice. I think that annihilation sounds better than eternity in heaven. And here we have three gentlemen on the screen telling me that I am wrong about my own opinion about my eternal fate.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and Clay Jones recently published a book called Immortal that is all about this as well. There are philosophers published in academic journals who say that when people say they're not afraid of death and ceasing to be, they're fooling themselves.
So, Chris, I haven't read your book. Pardon me. I have a bad cold, and I'm sorry, guys. I'm struggling through this. Tell me, Chris, where this research is. I did all kinds of Google Scholar searches on people fooling themselves if they want to be annihilated. I can't find it. Perhaps if I read your book, perhaps you would cite it, but I legitimately went on a search to find this research and can't find it. So until you've shown me where it is, citations needed, citations, please, because I can't find it. And even so, what kind of research paper is going to tell me that I don't know my own preferences? I don't even see how that could possibly be.
Like I'm on academic authority saying I think Paulogia is being dishonest with himself. I'm not trying to psychologize
I'm on academic authority that Paulogia is lying to himself.
necessarily. I'm just observing that that philosophers know they can tell that people are typically, not always, but typically fooling themselves.
Not always means that I could be one of those exceptions, right? Here's the thing. I think that I have thought about my own death a lot more than the average person has. And if I want to psychoanalyze, it sure sounds like I've thought about my own death more than you three on this panel have thought about your own death. I don't know that that's true, but it's starting to feel true. And I could throw out this accusation that because you guys fear death so much and you haven't thought about the fact that annihilation is fine, that's why you believe in God. Yeah, the only reason you believe in God is because you're afraid of death. Is that a convincing argument? Is that something that I should be making videos about? Should I get on a live stream and talk about how you guys haven't really thought it through? Is that helpful or compelling?
And notice
Fooling
that,
themselves more than being intentionally dishonest with themselves
Right.
or with others. Yeah, it's
So I'm not lying. I'm just deluded and haven't thought this through. I have thought this through. So maybe I'm one of those exceptions. And if I'm one of those exceptions, then I'm not deluding myself. Frankly, again, sorry, and this is a tough topic for me to think about, is these times when I was facing my own mortality. So pardon the pauses. It's a difficult period of my life to relive, and I'm trying to get through this stream without breaking down upon reflecting upon those things, because it's not an easy thing to reflect on your own mortality. I'm not pretending it is. I'm not pretending it's trivial. It's something that everyone should face with trepidation, and it is, I would agree that unless you have an imminent threat, that you maybe don't know how you're going to react. I don't think anyone can really predict accurately what they're going to do when they're facing death. So I want to take this with all those necessary seriousness. I know lots of people watching have had their own near-death experiences as well, not in the near-death experience sense of experiencing heaven or whatever, but facing our own mortality. I know lots of people in the audience have faced their mortality. It's not just me. Where was I going with this? Oh, that I'm not lying to myself, is what he said. Sorry, I've lost my thought again. Let's keep listening.
you haven't thought
It's a
about it.
mechanism. It's a defense mechanism to,
Yeah.
I think, to protect their emotions when they do start to think about this, which they so often don't have to.
It's a defense. So my willingness to be annihilated, my complete calm, and the feelings of calm that I get when I think about that are a defense mechanism to cover my dread. But let's say that's the case. I mean, then I don't have the dread, right? Even if it doesn't matter whether, let's say I took a pill, a non-dread pill that just removed dread from my life, or, for a day or whatever. then it still is true that I'm not operating on dread at that point. Whether I got there honestly, dishonestly, through trickery or whatever, or it's just a merely excuse. The fact is, I'm not operating on dread at that moment. So for you to just wave your hands and insinuate that really dread is still operating when I found a coping mechanism to alleviate the dread just means that your point is moot. Now, it doesn't get introduced real well here. He's throwing up a clip of Christopher Hitchens. Now, those of you who know Christopher Hitchens' life well know that his particular life ended with a battle for cancer. Christopher Hitchens, I can tell, he didn't give a specific date and time of when this clip happens, but I can tell from the appearance of Christopher, when he was in his prime, he had a full head of hair, and he had more pounds than he does in this particular clip. I can tell that this is a clip of Christopher as he's approaching the end, because he got skinnier and skinnier and lost more and more hair as he battled the cancer. So it seems a little bit ironic to me that this clip we're about to hear is Christopher Hitchens near the end of his life.
It's unlike any belief that Sam and I can offer you. Maybe all kinds of discrepancies between scientific views. We cannot promise you things of this kind, as religion always has to be. Doesn't make us morally superior, but it does mean, and we're not particularly happy with what we propose, which is overwhelmingly likely that annihilation and extinction await us.
Okay, so I didn't put this Christopher Hitchens clip in there. They did. This is something that Chris wanted to be played on the stream. Hitchens basically saying there, the point that is, to me, he's affirming that annihilation is likely what awaits him, and yet he is a man who's battling cancer, who's very clearly facing his own mortality. And he's still acknowledging that annihilation is probably what awaits him. He says, I'm not happy about it, but I've accepted it as the reality, and so I'm calm about it. I'm not dreading it. I think this clip in itself disproves his point, but let's see what he wants to say.
Chris?
So notice what he's saying. He's saying we have every reason to think that that annihilation is what awaits us when we die, and we atheists cannot compete with Christianity as the solution to that dreadful prospect. So yeah,
So this is hilarious. So he thinks he's in a gotcha moment with Chris Hitchens, that Chris Hitchens is saying, yeah, religion has come up with a story that helps people deal with their fear of death, and that if you don't believe in God, you don't have the luxury of that story to help you toward the end of life. Yeah, we don't. The whole point of all this is that when you have to stare at the end of your life, as someone who doesn't believe in God, you're the ones that have to look at the stark reality and come to objective choices. When you, instead of facing those hard facts, adopt a story that lets you escape those consequences, then you're the ones, in my view. So the three men on screen here who have adopted this particular story are the ones who are not the ones looking at death in reality. They're the ones who are delusional and escapist and not looking at the real consequences of death. Christopher Hitchens and myself have stared at that final end. Christopher lost his battle. I won my battle for now. We'll see. Probably will be how I die eventually. I'm okay with that. Or look at Dave Warnock. Same situation. Dave Warnock knows roughly how and when his life is going to end. Facing that consequence without God in a very calm and a happy manner. We're the ones who've really looked at the reality.
I'll own it. I'll own that I'm psychologizing, sure, because anybody who really thinks through the issue carefully knows that the only people who don't dread death and extinction are people who either know that's not the end because
Yeah, like you, if you put in a stopgap story and deluded yourself into thinking that it doesn't matter if I die because it's going to go on forever anyway. Yeah, I agree. Those people may not fear death. Although I I will say when I was on the cancer ward and watched people die, watching their final time come to an end, that it didn't seem to make much difference. People who were religious, people who weren't. Some of the religious people went out kicking and screaming, not liking it. And I don't think Chris Tate would necessarily disagree with that. But Christianity is not an automatic guarantor that you don't fear death again. But fearing death is not the same as wanting to live forever.
They're utterly sure that Christianity is true, or they've got a mental problem, like a mental health issue.
Okay. So either I am wrong, I didn't actually face death, I'm not actually okay with being annihilated, or I have a mental health problem. I have just been diagnosed on stream with these three men of potentially having a mental health problem. Throwing out mental health, throwing out mental illness as a diagnosis of anyone when you're a professional is irresponsible, is something you should take very lightly. If you are not a professional psychiatrist who has had a chance to talk to a person and have all the diagnosis equipment you have there, no. Mental illness, really, Chris? Mental illness is what I have.
Some sort of insanity or psychopathy.
Insanity now. So we're just conflating all mental illness with insanity and psychopathy. This is irresponsible. Forget the fact that I'm personally involved here and that they're personally looking at me. You can't be calling people insane on stream. You can't be diagnosing them. First of all, it negatively impacts people who really do have mental illness in terms of just not only belittling them, but also stigmatizing them. So it waters that word down. It hurts that way, but it also, anyway, that's the main thing. I'm struggling with this stream because I'm feeling a little emotional about it, as you can imagine. So my apologies for the emotional part of it. Let's carry on.
It's
like
healthy.
People would say in this push, but suicidal people who kill themselves, obviously that's what they wanted, and
but number one, think of how difficult it is for people who commit.
Okay, I'm just going to interject there. We already did speak about, so in Canada, we have the ability to end our lives. People can do assisted suicide when they want to have a dignified end of life. Those people all want and are willing for their life to end. Some of whom think that their life will go on, some of them who don't. There's a real category of people who definitely want their life to end.
Suicide typically don't just suddenly think, oh, I'm going to commit suicide, and bam, they do it. They work at it to try to muster up the courage to do it very often. And oftentimes after they start the process, they turn around. They're like, no, I don't want to do this after all. And even those who do follow through with it do so because they're in a.
Okay, he's going to say something really terrible there too. So here's the second thing. So I already talked about my diagnosis that I was going to die. Or at least the doctor's suspicion that I was going to, and to get me to get my affairs in order. Now we're talking about suicide. And I don't think I've ever talked about this on stream before. Anywhere. But there was a time in my life when I wanted my life to end. And took steps to end my life. Including, so the way I thought I would make this work was to step out in front of a bus, step out in front of a big truck, something. I thought that was the way I was going to make this happen. And one day I went out walking late at night and I found my opportunity. A big vehicle was coming. And I stepped out in the street. And Chris will say, well, apology, you're still here. You obviously didn't go through with it. And he's going to say the reason I didn't go through with it was because I personally cared about my own life so much that wasn't it. The trouble was when I was standing there, the thought in my head was not myself, not that I wanted this to continue, but I thought about my 3 kids. I hope they never watch this. I thought about my 3 kids and what their life would be like. I was relatively close to home. They could have potentially saw me. They could have potentially found me. It would have been neighbors. They would have, what flashed through my head is what their life was going to be like if I did this, and how selfish that would have been. So I stepped back, and it wasn't that I wanted my life to continue. Whatever Chris will say, whatever these guys will say, that wasn't the reason. It was because of other people. And so I kept living for them. And that's not the state of mind I'm at anymore. I have lots to live for. I'm very happy. But we all have times where we definitely want our lives to end, and it's not existential dread that necessarily brings us back from those things. So twice here now. So Chris has accused me of not seriously thinking about my own death. And I can tell you, you don't have to believe me. Chris probably doesn't believe me. I've stared at these decisions very seriously and very really, and in ways that were imminent and unavoidable. And at all of those points, I would have told you that I preferred annihilation over an eternity of life. Maybe I'm an anomaly. Maybe I'm weird. But the point of the video was to give my opinion. But these 3 men are telling you that my opinion is not my opinion. This is a common Christian trope that Romans 1:20 tells them that they know our thoughts. The Bible tells them what our thoughts, better than what our own thoughts are, until they come to accept and embrace that some skeptics do know our own thoughts. We are able to examine our own thoughts and make decisions based upon them. Christianity is going to ring hollower and hollower the more they insist that they know our thoughts better than we do. I don't know if I'm in the Matrix. I don't know if this is a big simulation, but I know the content of my thoughts. I don't know that my thoughts are true, but I can read the content of my thoughts. That's the only thing I can know for sure. I don't know if my eyes work. I don't know if my ears actually work. These all could be wrong. My senses could be wrong, but the content of my thoughts, I can know what those are.
This seems to be hopeless. No hope of ending the suffering that they're experiencing. But what Christ offers isn't just merely everlasting life in pain. That's what the doctrine of eternal torment offers people. No, what Christianity offers is an eternal life in bliss.
Yeah. And guess what? The question wasn't, would I choose eternal life or bliss or an eternal life of torment? That's an easy choice. In my original video, I said, if you put option C on the table, non-eternal life, annihilation, that's what I would choose. I don't know that that's a choice I'm going to get. I suspect we're all going to be annihilated. I suspect no Christian will ever find out that they're wrong, because they will die and they will cease to exist and they will never know. But I could be wrong about that. And maybe there are, who knows what the afterlife options are. Maybe Chris is right that it's bliss or torment, and I should have chose bliss. All I'm saying is, if option C is on the table, that's the one I'm going to pick. And these guys want to tell you that's not the option I would pick. Okay. I don't know what that gets you, but okay.
And purpose and community and fellowship and love and on it goes. So yeah,
I don't want any of that forever. Don't want any of that forever.
I don't buy anytime somebody says that, oh, if annihilation is true, like I'll just forget about it. I don't think they're being honest with themselves.
All right. Well, there's his last word. I am not being honest with myself. And I don't really understand why they had to do a stream to talk about that, because I don't know what difference it makes to a Christian whether I'm deluding myself or not. I guess they just want to say that I've come to my conclusions that Christianity is false based on some kind of lie. I guess. I don't know. I wanted to mainly come on stream to show you that I have thought about these things seriously. Hopefully that this rings true for others who are in my case, who have faced death, faced terminal diagnoses, faced accidents, faced any of those kind of things, and know that you are going to have Christians come at you and tell you that you're lying to yourself. So prepare yourself for that on top of everything else. For those of you who have had suicidal thoughts, again, they're psychoanalyzing you. They know why you did or didn't do those things. Chris is wrong. I have whatever he wants to claim, whatever you want to say. I have thought about my own death in detailed ways. And that's all I'm here to say. So, what do you think? Am I deluding myself? Is any of this relevant? How is any of this relevant? Let me know in the comments what emotions this stirred in you. What arguments am I missing? All these things. Was this a worthy stream for me to have? Was it a worthy stream for Braxton and Jonathan and Chris to have, to let me know that I'm wrong? I don't know. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, or if you want to talk about it now, we can leave me a super chat, because that is where we're heading. We are heading to the super chat portion of our show. Let me jump there, and we will see what we got. Oh, Trinity Radio. Okay, Braxton, presumably for $10. No need to read this out, so I won't. It ends with, I really care about you. Thank you if it's Braxton or Jonathan or whoever it is. Yeah, I think that is a good... There were some careless words there and some blanket statements that were irresponsible in my view. And anyway, thank you, Braxton, for reaching out, or whoever it was. Oh, hello, Chris. Welcome to the live stream, Chris. I'm sorry for the inconsiderate insensitivity, for hurting you, for drumming up memory of your past experience. Truly, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. There's no way that you could have known that I faced imminent death a few times. That's not something that I publicly put out there. It's not part of my persona, so I don't expect anyone. It's not a matter of that you should have known or anything like that. I just think that's an irresponsible claim to make of anyone, that you know their minds and you know their hearts, especially when it comes to something as serious. Or as, I don't know how you could, Chris, I don't understand how you could possibly go on a stream and just say that I know what someone's thinking more than they do, when you acknowledge that it wasn't a universal trait that people dread death. That's obviously not correct. It's not universal. But I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate you reaching out and leaving that comment. Thank you so much. And should you ever wish, I don't know if you were here for it, but should you ever wish to talk about it on a stream or something, or privately, that is something I'd be up for.